Hello, dear students. So now we shall be talking about Matthew Arnold, the Victorian poet, and we'll be talking about his very famous poem, Dover Beach. Okay, so Dover Beach was first published in the collection entitled New Poems, which was published in 1867. Although scholars believe that the poem was written much earlier, that is, it perhaps uh, occurred sometime between 1849 and 1851. But the standard date, which is accepted by all, is 1851. Now, what is Arnold talking about in this poem? Let's go to a bit of a background. You see, the Victorian era was majorly charged by two issues. One was the rift between doubt and faith, and the second thing was the Industrial Revolution. And in this poem, we get impacts of both. Also, there is a third issue. The third issue is of education, which we'll come towards later. Now, when we think about the, let's first talk about the Industrial Revolution. Industrial Revolution in England in the Victorian times, it actually began with the Romantics. Because you see, during the first half of the 19th century, already industry was creeping in. However, what happened was that many people, many romantic poets and writers, they were apprehensive of it. But in 1851, the great trade fair of London that marked the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, as we call it. But it had begun way earlier than this event. This event merely marked the beginning of a new era. So, what happened is that the Industrial Revolution created a rift in England. The northern side, where the main industries were established, started to become rich, and the southern side, which was mainly famous for agriculture, was starting to lose its grip. Now, there was a mass exodus from the south to the north. Why? Because people would get work. But the cities had a limit of containing people. So new slums began to be built. There was unsanitary, unhygienic condition of life, unsustainable conditions. And if you read Charles Dickens, if you read William Makepeace Thackeray's novels, then you find apt representations of this new situation in England. However, the thing does not stop merely here, because if you read the Victorian way of life, I'm not going much into the historical background or political cultural background, because that you can read up anywhere. I'm just giving you some hints that what are the things which kind of propagated this poem. The second issue is the issue of doubt and faith. With Darwinism, sorry, what happened was that people started doubting the Christian way of belief. There was a group which still held on to its belief that God had created everything and put man on the top. But there was another school of thought which accepted the Darwinian principles, because before Darwin, Lamarck had spoken in the similar lines talking about evolution. But Darwin was giving proper founded discoveries. He was bringing forth proper soundly founded discoveries which indicated that such a thing was happening actually, that evolution was true, and what the Christian theories had propagated was false. Now, after the Elizabethan period, when Galileo and the others had actually shaken the belief of the Christian thought in the late 1500s and the early 1600s, this was another major jolt, because for almost 2 centuries there was a sedimentation, 2 3 centuries almost, there was a sedimentation in the belief. But once again, Darwin's challenge shook up, caused an upheaval of the belief system and brought a new set of beliefs which shook the theological fiber of the West. Now, with this, something very important happened. There was a rift in society. Some believed in science, some believed in God. So, this church science binary kind of created a sense of disbelief, a sense of cultural uh, dilemma, which was absolutely seen in the poetry of the times. If you read Tennyson's poems, if you read Arnold's poems, you find them in abundance. Also, there was a third issue. The third issue was the issue of education. You see, Matthew Arnold and his father, they were propagators of education. They were educationalists. They wanted no uh, dangerous discourse in the society, and they saw education as that medial path which exists between the rich and the poor. So, with education, Matthew Arnold wanted to create a new middle class which did not have the money of the rich, the wealthy. Neither it had the physical strength of the poor, but it had education. So, this idea of creating a new middle class through education was very important. If you see Matthew Arnold's discourse on culture and anarchy, there you will find that Matthew Arnold talks about culture not in very concrete terms. He does not suggest that, okay, you know Greek, you know Latin, you know French, you know German, so you are a cultured person. No. Matthew Arnold says that that's merely curiosity. What makes culture? Sweetness and light. Then what is anarchy? Who is a cultured person? Basically, someone who can propagate sweetness and there is a light about him or her. That is, that person is illuminated, enlightened. On the other hand, we have anarchy. Whatever does not fall within the precepts of culture is anarchy. Arnold was noticing that the society which he resided in was slowly becoming uh, divided into these two extremes, culture and anarchy. And Arnold hoped that we tilt towards culture and not towards anarchy. Because you see, already the European political situation was becoming very, very unstable, which would lead to the World War as we know it. Now, if we have to be cultured, then we have to know what is culture. And Arnold suggests that the pinnacle of human culture was the Hellenistic culture, that is the Greek culture. And here we have many Greek references, and therefore I am referring to it. There is another very interesting thing. Good literature propagates good culture. A well read man is as valued as a statesman. So, what happens is that Arnold gives a concept, the concept of the touchstone. If you take some gold to a jeweler, the jeweler would press the gold against some stone, he would rub it, and then he would say, okay, this is this much pure, that much impure. So that stone, which kind of judges the purity of the gold is called a touchstone. So for Matthew Arnold, he's not talking about gold. He's not a jeweler. So what is a touchstone? Matthew Arnold suggests that a touchstone is the classics which have stood the test and taste of time. So both the TEST and the TAST. So the classics which have stood the test and test of time, if you pitch your work of art or the work of art that you are reading against that classic and it still maintains its standard, then it's a classic. So this was Matthew Arnold's touchstone method. Okay. Now, here we'll find that he is putting this poem in this touchstone method and trying to bring out the beauty of a natural scenery, and through that beauty how he is talking about human relationships. Let's go into the poem straight away without further ado. Now, Dover Beach is actually a geographical location in England which divides the English and the French coasts. The sea is calm tonight. The tide is full. The moon lies fair upon the straits. On the French coast, the light glimmers and is gone. The cliffs of England stand, glimmering and vast, out in the tranquil bay. So look, in a very naturalistic description, Arnold brings out the beauty of a seascape at night. The sea is calm tonight. At the very beginning of the poem, at the very outset of the poem, Arnold sets the mood and the tone of the poem, which is a mood of calm. He is not talking about something which is very boisterous, very fiery. He's talking about something which is very calm. So the sea is calm tonight. And it is this calmness which exudes throughout the poem. The tide is full. So it's full tide. The moon lies fair upon the straits. And the moon is shining upon the straits. That is the coastal region. On the French coast, so he's talking about now the other side. The light glints and is gone. So there is a light twinkling on the French coast. The cliffs of England stand, glimmering and vast. So look how he uses the words, the intonations, to create a biblical sonority when he is talking about the English soil, the English scenery, out in the tranquil bay. So towards the bay, the cliffs are slowly receding. And look, these lines, they are deliberately made slow with a carefully chosen vowel and consonant ordering so that you can't read them very fast. You can't read it like the sea is calm tonight, the tide is full, the moon lies fair. Doesn't sound good. But look, if you read it, the sea is calm tonight, the tide is full, then it sounds better. So there is a hypnotic charm to these lines. Look, the sea is calm tonight, the sea is calm tonight, the sea is calm tonight. It's a lyric, it's more of a lullaby. And Arnold creates this hypnotic charm of the moon-blanched landscape. And this moon-blanched landscape is so very beautiful. And Arnold creates such a pictorial image. You can almost imagine, you can almost see it in front of you. The pictures are so clear. It's almost a cinematic narration, a cinematic representation, as if the camera is panning now and you are seeing the entire seascape at night. Come to the window. Sweet is the night air. This reference is perhaps to his wife, but you can also consider that this reference is to the reader. So, since the page where the poem is written, we can consider that page as a window. So, he says, come to the window. Let me show you the world. So, the poet becomes the mediator between the poetry and the poem, between the poetry and the reader, between the scenery and its narration. So, look on how many levels this poem functions. Sweet is the night air, and he deliberately creates this succinct, this somber, sweet melody throughout his words. He's weaving his words to create melody. Only from the long line of spray, where the sea meets the moon-blanched land, listen, you hear the grating roar of pebbles which the waves draw back and fling. So now he's talking about the ebb and flow of the waves. So he says, only from the long line of spray. So look how he uses this L alliteration. He's repeating the L sound in alliteration. Only from the long line of spray, where the sea meets the moon-blanched land, where the sea meets the moon-drenched land, listen. So he is participating the reader to, he's asking the reader, he's pleading the reader to pause and participate in the moon-blanched scenery. Listen, you hear the grating roar. So now look, the sounds are changing. The soft L sound is now being replaced by the harsh G sound, the T sound, and the R sound. I can as it hear the sea roaring, the grating roar of pebbles which the waves draw back and fling. So now he talks about the coming and going, the ebb and flow of the sea, and also the ebb and flow of life. At their return of the high strand, begin and cease and then again begin, with tremulous cadence slow, and bring the eternal note of sadness in. Here Matthew Arnold is referring to Virgil, who in his Eclogues writes a very interesting line, Sunt lacrimae rerum et mentem mortalia tangent, the still sad note of humanity. And look how beautifully he translates this into another language by saying, begin and cease and then again begin. So the waves come, they go back, and then again they come. So they begin and cease and then again begin. It's almost like Rabindranath's poem, তরঙ্গ মিলায় যায় তরঙ্গ উঠে কুসুম ঝরিয়া পড়ে কুসুম ফুটে নাহি ক্ষয় নাহি শেষ নাহি নাহি দৈন্য দেশ সেই পূর্ণতার পায় মনস্থান মাগে. So তরঙ্গ মিলায় যায় তরঙ্গ উঠে, waves cease and waves are born, কুসুম ঝরিয়া পড়ে কুসুম ফুটে, flowers die and flowers are born. Nahi khoyo, so there's no cessation, there's no end. There's no erosion, corrosion. Nahi khoyo, nahi shesh, so there's no end. Nahi nahi doinno lesh, so there's no hint of poverty in this eternal cycle. Shei purnotar paye monosthan mage. So my heart seeks refuge in at the feet of that great abundance. And look how Arnold translates it. begin and cease and then again begin, with tremulous cadence slow. You cannot read Dover Beach very fast. And there is not much explanation of the poem that can be done. It has to be felt from deep within. It's a highly philosophical poem which talks about the ebb and flow of life and bring the eternal note of sadness in. When you are sad, you cannot laugh. When you are sad, you cannot speak very fast. When you are sad, you cannot go laughing around. You calm down. You tone yourself down. And this poem talks about that human sadness. But why does this poem talk about the human sadness so much? Why does this poem philosophize about the human existence so much? Because the times are such when human beings are tormented by doubt, by disarray, both politically, providentially, and personally. Their beliefs are shaken, their political affinities are shaken, and their providential sanctity, that is their divine sanctity, that is also shaken. Now, when a person is shaken to such an extent, can there be any other language in which the man can speak? Some people have criticized Matthew Arnold because, unlike Tennyson, who offers you both doubt and faith and allows you to choose, but some critics or some scholars have suggested that Arnold chooses for you. He almost makes you choose, that you have to choose the faith. But I do not believe that. Because if Arnold had chosen faith or if he had chosen doubt, he would have made it clear. He wouldn't have written in a very different way. In the next stanza, when we will be reading it soon enough, I will show that how Arnold neither chooses doubt nor does he choose faith, rather, he chooses love. He thinks that in this dilemma of doubt and faith, love is the only choice which can save us. And he says this in this poem. Look, he says, Sophocles long ago heard it on the Aegean, and it brought into his mind the turbid ebb and flow of human misery. So Sophocles is a 5th century BC poet, a dramatist who has written some great tragedies. He was a brilliant artist of the tragedies, and Sophocles wrote specifically one play which I find Arnold finds interesting, which is Antigone. In one of the choruses of Antigone, if you read it, you'll find that there is a reference to the turbid flow of the waves, and it is compared to the human situation. Because Antigone is also suffering from such a human dilemma. One of her brothers, who is now a statesman, is against the proper burial of another brother because he has committed some form of treason. And Antigone is in a dilemma. As a sister, she should bury her brother or give her brother a proper ritualistic farewell. On the other hand, she is a citizen and she should accept the laws, the mandates of the land. And she is in a dilemma. And there she ponders, there the chorus ponders about the human situation, which is always in a turbid ebb and flow. And Arnold refers to that. So look, in a way, Arnold locates himself in the great tradition which has concerned itself with the human situation of turbid ebb and flow. Isn't it so? Some days are good, some days are bad, some days are mediocre. But there is not a single human being in whose life there is not a single good day, not a single bad day, not a single mediocre day. Nobody's life can be perfect. It cannot be that somebody is having a good day on each and every day. And it cannot be that somebody is having a bad day on each and every day. So what happens is that Sophocles also spoke about this same thing when he was writing Antigone. And he heard it on the Greek soil, and Arnold is hearing on the English soil. And in a pandemic situation, we are hearing it on the Indian soil. And therefore, it becomes so very important for us to understand Matthew Arnold here on this Indian time and Indian climate. We find also in the sound the thought, hearing it by this distant northern sea. And Arnold links both us to Sophocles. So if look at my arm. So if Sophocles is here, Arnold is here, and we are here. Arnold is the connector between Sophocles and you and I. So he becomes the bridge. With his own individual talent, he connects the two traditions, the traditions of the Greek times, the traditions of his times, and the tradition of our times. And therefore, Arnold is such an important poet. And look, then he says, the sea of faith was once two at the full, and round earth's shore lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled. Girdle is simply like a kamarband or a belt which we wear around our pants. So he says that once the sea of faith, so here he uses the sea imagery, the sea metaphor to talk about faith. So people had faith in a divine figure once, but with the Victorian utilitarianism, having a faith in an absolute uh, loving God had become very difficult. Imagine if you have a watch and say you have a geo connection and it's not working, then you do not go to Mukesh Ambani and say that please fix my network. You just go to your nearest service provider and you say, okay, there is some problem and you please fix it. Isn't it so? Similarly, what happens over here is that the utility of a creator, an omnipotent absolute creator, has ended. Therefore, look what Arnold says, the sea of faith was once too at the full, and round earth's shore lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled. But now I only hear its melancholy long withdrawing roar. And look, he is basically now referring to the sadness that he feels at the loss of faith. He also, as a Victorian person, is seriously perturbed by the loss of faith. And therefore he says, but now I only hear its melancholy, long withdrawing roar. So, in all the sound, in all the cacophony of the society, the presence of a God is not felt anymore, is not heard anymore. God has become comfortably absent in the utilitarian world, retreating to the breath of the wind, down the vast stages drear and naked shingles of the world. So now what is left is the naked stones and pebbles of the world, as if a sea, a wave, when it recedes, it exposes the pebbles, the sand which is under it. Similarly, when the sea of faith is receding, it is showing the naked bones of the world. The world is laid bare in front of our eyes, where we can see the dark motives of people, how savage human beings can be, how savage we are. Here, there is one issue that in traditional theological thought, it is believed that without a consolidated religion, there would be no morality. But later thinkers have said that if you need to have religion to have morality, then your morality is always under question. But let's not go into that. Let's stick to what Arnold says. Then he comes to the alternative. He says, love. Let us be true to one another. So he's talking about his love. So he says that only love can save people in this dire hour of need, in this hour of dire necessity. He says, let us be true to one another because the world is filled with falsity. The world is filled with falsehood. The world is filled with pretension, where people pretend to be something that they are not. Just open your Facebook account. Everybody seems so happy. Are they really? That's a question that you must ask yourself every single day. If you think that people are so happy and I'm not having a good time, then also understand that that's pretension. So, he says, for the world which seems to lie before us, in one sense, lie that is which is left before us, and in the other sense, lie that is a falsity, like a land of dreams. So, the world is like a dream, it's like a hallucination, it's like a nightmare, it's a dream, it's not reality. It's a figment of our imagination. The world is how we have made it to be. So various, so beautiful, so new. Hath neither really joy, hath really neither joy, nor love, nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help for pain. So that very world which seems so beautiful, so new, so various, so variegated with experiences, doesn't really have joy. It doesn't really offer love. It doesn't have any light. There is no certitude. There is no certainty. No peace. No help for pain. Then look what he says. You might feel that he is being despondent. He is being hopeless. But it's very difficult to keep hope in the hopeless times. I know it's easy to say tough times never last, but tough people do. But even those tough people have their moments of dilemma. Even those tough people have second thoughts. And Arnold is voicing those second thoughts. And we are here as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggles and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night. Here he refers to one of the earliest Greek historians, Thucydides, who wrote a book called The History of the Peloponnesian War. The Peloponnesian War was a major battle which took place in ancient Greece, and it is believed that it marked the beginning of the end of the Greek Empire, the classical Greek Empire. Excuse me. Now, the Peloponnesian War was so very important because in the Peloponnesian War, something interesting happened. That is, one army attacked its own self in the darkness. In the darkness of the night, one army stealthily went to attack the opponents and ended up in the confusion attacking their own party. And thus, one army lost. And Arnold takes this reference and says that look, the way we are going, the selfish way we are going, we cannot trust anyone. We are selfish. We are self centered. We only think about the utility of things and people. The way we are going, we are actually harming ourselves. If history teaches us through stories, through events, then we must learn from the history of the Peloponnesian War and realize that actually in the long run we are harming ourselves. We are destroying ourselves as a culture, as a civilization. And look, very prophetically, I personally believe Arnold was looking at the troublesome situation in Europe of the time. Perhaps he was anticipating a war of a massive scale. I'm not saying the First World War, but that's what poets are. They can anticipate a lot of things. Perhaps Arnold was anticipating a war of a massive scale. I'm not saying the World War. Perhaps he was anticipating a war of massive scale, and he saw that love, trust, faith, these are the things which perhaps might still save us. So, Dover Beach can be seen as an Armageddon written by Matthew Arnold, which will come before the doomsday. So, that's it for Dover Beach. Thank you for listening and hope to see you in the next lecture. Goodbye.